Good day, children. So far, we have done lessons and poems which have enhanced your love for literature. Today, we will have some action, a thriller, which I'm sure all of you will enjoy. The chapter in reference is the 7th lesson in Vistas, the supplementary reader. And the lesson is Evans Tries an O-Level by Colin Dexter. Evans, the protagonist, is an inmate of Oxford prison who has taken a penchant for breaking from jail frequently. His ingenuity impresses the readers as he is not a seasoned criminal but only a kleptomaniac. O-level in the title is the ordinary level qualification which a student attains in any subject or language after attending part-time or evening classes, and this level is predominantly exam-based. In this story, Evans has taken an interest in German classes and is ready for his German O-level examination. Is he keen on acquiring a qualification, or is this his modus operandi for another jailbreak? Let us see. The dramatis personae or the characters are the Secretary of the Examinations Board, the Governor of H.M. Prison, Oxford, James Evans, a prisoner, Mr. Jackson and Mr. Stevens, prison officers, the Reverend S. McCleary, an invigilator, Mr. Carter, the Detective Superintendent, Mr. Bell, Detective Chief Inspector. All precautions have been taken to see to it that the O-level German examination arranged in the prison for Evans does not provide him with any means of escape. It was in early March when the Secretary of the Examinations Board received a call from Oxford Prison. It is a slightly unusual request, Governor, but I don't see why we shouldn't try to help. Just the one fellow, you say? So in the early March, the Secretary of Examination Board received a call from the Oxford Prison, to be precise, received a call from the Governor of H.M. Prison, Oxford. And a request was put in. And as a reply, he says that the request is unusual. It's rather unusual. So the Secretary of the Examination Board says that the request is unusual. But he does not see any reason why they shouldn't help this inmate who has actually requested for the O-level examination. Just the one fellow, you say? So he wants to know whether only one person is writing the O-level German examination. The governor clarifies. That's it. Chap called Evans started night classes in O-level German last September. Says he is dead keen to get some sort of academic qualification. Is he any good? He was the only one in the class, so you can say he had individual tuition all the time. Would have cost him a packet if he had been outside. Well, let's give him a chance, shall we? So the governor clarifies that the inmate who has requested for the O-level German exam is Evans. He started his classes in September, and so now in March he has requested to write the exam. So that means he has had 6 months of night classes. And now he's keen to get this qualification, and he will get the qualification only if he writes the O-level exam. The Secretary of the Examinations Board wants to know if he is any good. As a reply, the governor says he was the only one student in the class and he has had all the personal attention. Because he was in prison, the government has taken up the expenses. Outside, it would have cost him a packet. He would have had to pay a huge amount. So now the secretary says, okay, let us give him a chance. That's jolly kind of you. What exactly is the procedure now? Oh, don't worry about that. I'll be sending you all the forms and stuff. What's his name, you say? Evans? James Roderick Evans. It sounded rather grand. Just one thing, Governor. He is not a violent sort of fellow, is he? I don't want to know his criminal record or anything like that. But so now the talk between the governor and the secretary continues. So the governor is happy that the secretary is ready to give him a chance to write the exam. Now he wants to know what are the other formalities that the jail authorities have to do. The secretary convinces him, no, you don't have to worry about that. There are certain forms which the governor has to sign. And then he wants to know the name once again. The governor says the inmate's name is James Roderick Evans, which sound rather grand. He wants to know something more. He wants to know whether this inmate has a history of aggressive behavior. He tells that he is not interested in any confidential information. He just wants to know whether he has any history of violent behavior so that the invigilator remains safe. As a reply, the governor says, no, there's no record of violence. Quite a pleasant sort of chap, they tell me. Bit of a card, really. One of the stars at the Christmas concert, imitations, you know the sort of thing, Mike Yarwood stuff? No, he is just a congenital kleptomaniac, that's all. The governor was tempted to add something else, but he thought better of it. He would look after that particular side of things himself. Now, there's a description of Evans which you have to note down, children. Point-wise, you have to note down. So, no, there is no record of violence in Evans. In fact, he's a very pleasant sort of chap. As first point you would underline, he's a pleasant person. Bit of a card. At times, he has a weird nature. Bit of a card means odd. He displays odd behavior or a weird nature sometimes. Second point. One of the stars at the Christmas concert. So, for the previous Christmas concert, he had become a star. Why? Because he's very good at imitations. Like Mike Yarwood stuff. Mike Yarwood is a famous imitator. And so, he does that kind of stuff. So, the third point is, he's a good imitator. No, he's just a congenital kleptomaniac. Fourth and the most important point, he's a congenital kleptomaniac. Congenital means inborn. Kleptomaniac, one who has the habit of stealing. So they do not do it deliberately. It is just a habit for them to steal. So he is in jail because he is a kleptomaniac, which is inborn. That's all. So 4 important points about Evans there. The governor was tempted to add something else. There was some important point which the governor wanted to convey to the secretary, but he decides to keep it to himself because that was not the concern of the secretary. That was something the governor himself had to look into. He would look after that particular side of things himself. Presumably, said the secretary, you can arrange a room where, no problem, he is in a cell on his own. If you have no objections, he can sit the exam in there. That's fine. And we could easily get one of the parsons from St. Mary's Mags to invigilate, if that's fine. Yes, they seem to have a lot of parsons there, don't they? The two men chuckled good-naturedly, and the secretary had a final thought. At least, there's one thing, you shouldn't have much trouble keeping him incommunicado, should you? So again, there's a casual talk going on between the secretary and the governor. Secretary says that they have to arrange for a room for Evans to write the exam. Governor says there's no problem because Evans is lodged in a room of his own. And then the secretary says that they could get one of the priests from the nearby monastery, St. Mary's Mags, to come and invigilate the exam. And then the two men joke that there are so many priests, so many parsons there in there. And then he continues to say that there shouldn't be any problem to keep him from talking much. No communication will be possible because there are no inmates in his cell. Evans is all alone in his cell. The governor chuckled politely once more, reiterated his thanks and slowly cradled the phone. So having said that, the governor finally keeps the receiver back. And then he begins to contemplate on Evans. Evans, the break, as the prison officers called him. Thrice he had escaped from prison. And but for the recent wave of unrest in the maximum security establishments up north, he wouldn't now be grazing the governor's premises in Oxford, and the governor was going to make absolutely certain that he wouldn't be disgracing them. Not that Evans was a real burden, just a persistent, nagging presence. He would be all right in Oxford, though. The governor would see to that, would see to it personally. And besides, there was just a possibility that Evans was genuinely interested in O-level German. Just a slight possibility. Just a very slight possibility. At 8:30 p.m. on Monday, 7th June, Evans' German teacher shook him by the hand in the heavily guarded recreational block just across from D-Wing. So having cradled the phone, the governor begins to think about Evans. So why does Evans thought trouble him so much? He is also known, he goes by the nickname in the jail as Evans the Break. Why? Because he had escaped thrice from jail. And actually he should be shifted to the maximum security establishment somewhere in the north. But due to some trouble that has happened there, he has been kept in Oxford prison, and therefore he is now the headache of the governor. Governor has to see that he does not get another chance to escape. So in case he escapes, it would be a disgrace to the governor. And so the governor was going to make sure that Evans does not get another opportunity to humiliate them by escaping from the prison. So governor wonders whether he has used this O-level German examination as an opportunity to try to escape from the jail. So he also thinks that maybe Evans is genuinely interested in writing the exam. Maybe he's genuinely interested in the language and wants to get a qualification. At 8:30 p.m. on Monday, 7th June, Evans has his last class, and then the German teacher bids him adieu and leaves the jail, leaves his cell. Guten Glück, Herr Evans. Pardon? I said good luck for tomorrow. Oh, thanks, Dankeschön. You haven't a cat in hell's chance of getting through, of course, but I may surprise everybody, said Evans. So on Monday, 7th June, by 8:30 p.m., Evans has his last class, and as he's leaving, the German teacher wishes him good luck in German language. Evans does not understand that and says, pardon. The German teacher translates in English and says, I just wished you good luck for tomorrow. Oh, thanks. And then with a bit of hesitation, he's able to reply back in German. He says, Dankeschön, thank you, in German. Hearing all this, the German teacher says that Evans does not even have a slight chance of passing the O-level German examination. Evans immediately retorts. He says, I may surprise everybody. At 8:30 the following morning, Evans had a visitor. 2 visitors, in fact. He tucked his grubby string vest into his equally grubby trousers and stood up from his bunk, smiling cheerfully. Morning, Mr. Jackson. This is indeed an honor. Jackson was a senior prison officer on D-Wing, and he and Evans had already become warm enemies. At Jackson's side stood Officer Stevens, a burly, surly-looking man, only recently recruited to the profession. So at 8:30, Evans has an exam and he wakes up at 8:30 in the morning. As soon as he wakes up, he finds that he has two visitors who are prison officers. They have come to finally check the cell, take any dangerous things from the cell. So as he gets up, he tucks in his vest into his grubby trousers. Grubby means dirty trousers. And he stands up from his bunk and he wishes them good morning. This is indeed an honor. Jackson was the senior prison officer of the D-Wing, and Jackson and Evans did not have any liking towards each other. Along with Jackson had come Officer Stevens, who was a burly means stout, surly means rude looking officer, who was a fresher into this profession. Jackson nodded curtly. And how is our little Einstein this morning then? Wasn't he a mathematician, Mr. Jackson? I think he was a Jew, Mr. Jackson. Evans' face was unshaven and he wore a filthy looking red and white bobble hat upon his head. Give me a chance, Mr. Jackson. I was just going to shave when you burst in. So Jackson mocks him, saying, How is there, little Einstein? Evans replies that he questions whether he was a mathematician and says that he was a geo. Now Evans has not shaven, he has just got up from his bunk and he was wearing a dirty looking wool hat on his head. So he tells Jackson and Stevens to give him some time because he has to shave before the exam. Which reminds me, Jackson turned his eyes on Stevens. Make sure you take his razor out of the cell when he's finished scraping that ugly mug of his. Clear? One of these days he will do us all a favor and cut his bloody throat. So Jackson commands Stevens that when Evans has finished shaving, make sure to take the razor out of the cell, otherwise he's going to harm himself or somebody. For a few seconds, Evans looked thoughtfully at the man standing ramrod straight in front of him, a string of Second World War medals proudly paraded over his left breast pocket. Mr. Jackson, was it you who took my nail scissors away? Evans had always worried about his hands. And your nail file too. So Evans becomes thoughtful and he looks at Officer Jackson, who is standing there straight in an undignified way, and he questions whether it was Jackson who had taken the nail scissors from his cell. Jackson says that not only was his nail scissors taken, but also his nail file too. Look, for a moment, Evans' eyes smoldered dangerously, but Jackson was ready for him. Orders of the governor, Evans. He leaned forward and leered, his voice dropping to a harsh, contemptuous whisper. You want to complain? Evans shrugged his shoulders lightly. The crisis was over. So now Evans was very angry that all his belongings were being taken away by Jackson, and his eyes turned red due to anger because Jackson confesses that he had taken his nail scissors and his nail file too. And then he mocks him. But immediately, when Evans gets angry, he says that he did it because it was the order of the governor. And mocks him, asks him whether he wants to complain to the governor himself. Evans realizes that there is no use complaining because it was the governor himself who had ordered that all these things be taken from the cell. You've got half an hour to smarten yourself up, Evans, and take that bloody hat off. Evans puts his right hand lovingly on top of the filthy woolen and smiled sadly. Do you know, Mr. Jackson, it's the only thing that's ever brought me any sort of luck in life. Kind of lucky charm, if you know what I mean. And today I thought, well, with me, exam and all that, buried somewhere in Jackson was a tiny core of compassion, and Evans knew it. So now Jackson gives him the ultimatum, says that there is only half an hour left for the invigilator to come, and so he has to finish his shaving quickly. And finally, Jackson tells him that the bloody hat has to be taken off. The dirty woolen hat that Evans is wearing has to be taken off. Evans very lovingly touches the hat and says, requests in fact to Jackson, says that in life has not been very good to him, and today he has his exam. He's keen on qualifying this exam, and this woolen hat, this dirty woolen hat, has always been lucky charm for him, and so if he can retain it with him. He, very shrewd Evans, had already detected that there was compassion within Jackson, and right now he exploits this hidden compassion of Jackson. He's exploiting that. And so Jackson, who was compassionate but never exhibited it, agrees that he can keep the hat with him. Buried somewhere in Jackson was a tiny core of compassion, and Evans knew it. Just this once then, Shirley Temple. Shirley Temple is a famous actress, singer and dancer. So the way Evans was acting, Jackson calls him Shirley Temple. If there was one thing that Jackson genuinely loathed about Evans, it was his long wavy hair and shaving. So Jackson did not like his long wavy hair, and he thought that at least if he's wearing the woolen hat, it would conceal the long wavy hair. And so he relents, agrees that Evans keep his woolen hat with him. At 8:45 the same morning, the Reverend Stuart McCleary left his bachelor flat in Broad Street and stepped out briskly towards Carfax. The weatherman reported temperatures considerably below the normal for early June, and a long black overcoat and a shallow crowned clerical hat provided welcome protection from the steady drizzle which had set in half an hour earlier and which now spattered the thick lenses of his spectacles. In his right hand he was carrying a small brown suitcase which contained all that he would need for his morning duties, including a sealed question paper envelope, a yellow invigilation form, a special authentication card from the examinations board, a paper knife, a Bible, as he was to speak to the Women's Guild that afternoon on the Book of Ruth, and a current copy of the Church Times. So at 8:45 the same morning, when Evans was getting ready for his exam, Reverend Stuart McCleary, who was going to be the invigilator for the exam, leaves his bachelor flat in Broad Street and steps out into the street towards Carfax. There was a slight drizzle. Black overcoat and a shallow crowned clerical hat provided welcome protection from the drizzle which was falling. And in his right hand he was carrying a small brown suitcase which contained a sealed question paper envelope, a yellow invigilation form, a special authentication, an ID card from the examination board, a paper knife, a Bible, as he was to speak to the Women's Guild that afternoon on the Book of Ruth, and he also had a current copy of the Church Times. That's an important question. What all did he carry in his briefcase? So please make a note of it. The 2-hour examination was scheduled to start at 9:15 a.m. Evans was lathering his face vigorously when Stevens brought in 2 small square tables and set them opposite each other in the narrow space between the bunk on the one side and on the other a distempered stone wall. Next, Stevens brought in 2 hard chairs, a slightly less battered of which he placed in front of the table which stood nearer the cell door. So as Evans was shaving, Stevens places the furniture required for the exam. First he brings in a worn out table and then he brings in 2 chairs. Jackson put in a brief final appearance. "Behave yourself, laddie." Evans turned and nodded. "And these?" Jackson pointed to the pin-ups. "Off." Evans turned and nodded again. "I was going to take them down anyway. A minister, isn't he? The chap coming to sit in, I mean." "And how did you know that?" asked Jackson quietly. "Well, I had to sign some forms, didn't I? And I couldn't help." So Jackson finally comes in once again and then tells him to behave properly during the exam. He also looks at the vulgar posters that Evans has put up in his cell and asks him to take it off. Evans looks and says, "Yes, anyway, I have to take it down because the person who is coming in is a minister." Minister means a priest. Jackson is surprised that Evans knows who the invigilator is. Evans immediately says that he had to sign some forms and he had noticed that the invigilator who was coming in is a priest. Evans drew the razor carefully down his left cheek and left a neat swath in the white leather. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Jackson? Why did they have to bug me in this cell?" He nodded his head vaguely to a point above the door. "Not a very neat job," conceded Jackson. They don't honestly think I'm going to try to." "They are taking no chances, Evans. Nobody in his senses would take any chance with you. Who is going to listen in?" "I'll tell you who's going to listen in, laddie. It's the governor himself, see? He don't trust you a bloody inch. And nor do I. I'll be watching you like a hawk, Evans. And so, keep your nose clean. Clear?" He walked towards the door. So when Jackson comes in, Evans asks him why they had a concealed miniature microphone placed in his cell. So it means they could listen to every conversation that was happening in the cell. So Jackson agrees that they have not done a neat job of concealing this particular microphone. Evans wonders loudly. He asks Jackson, "Do you all think that I'm going to take this opportunity to escape from the jail?" As a reply, Jackson says that nobody in this jail is taking any chances because the person writing the exam is Evans. Now Evans wants to know who is going to listen to all the conversation? Jackson tells him that nobody else, it is the governor himself, because the governor himself has decided to personally monitor this exam which Evans is taking, and he does not want to give any opportunity for Evans to escape. So Jackson says it is the governor who is listening, and Jackson himself, the senior officer, would be watching him like a hawk. So he tells him to be very careful. Saying that, he walks out. Evans nodded. He had already thought of that, and number 2 handkerchief was lying ready on the bunk, a neatly folded square of off-white linen. Just one more thing, Einstein. Yeah, what's it? Good luck, old son. So wishing him all the luck, Jackson leaves the cell. In the little lodge just inside the prison's main gates, the Reverend S. McCleary signed his name neatly in the visitor's book and then walked side by side with a silent prison officer across the exercise yard to D wing, where he was greeted by Jackson. The wing's heavy outer door was unlocked and locked behind them, the heavy inner door the same, and McCleary was handed into Stephen's keeping. So now the invigilator, Reverend S. McCleary, comes in, and across the yard he is taken by one officer and handed over to Jackson, who was waiting there at the outer door. From the outer door to the inner door, Jackson takes him, and at the inner door he is received by Stephen, who is given the charge of remaining in the cell. As Jackson takes McCleary and hands him over to Stevens, he murmurs to Stevens, asking him to get the razor out from the cell. Stevens nodded. Well, keep your eyes skinned. Clear? Jackson again, finally, once again, tells Stevens to be very alert inside the cell. Stevens nodded again, and McCleary, his feet clanging up the iron stairs, followed his new guide and finally stood before a cell door where Stevens opened the peephole and looked through. So now Stevens takes McCleary up the iron staircase and reaches the cell door, where he opens the peephole and points out the inmate who is going to write the exam to McCleary. That's him, sir. Evans, facing the door, sat quietly at the further of the two tables, his whole attention riveted to a textbook of elementary German grammar. Stevens took the key from its ring, and the cell lock sprang back with a thudded metallic twang. After pointing him, when they look inside, they find that Evans was seated there with the book kept open, with the textbook of elementary German grammar kept open, and he was fully concentrating into the book. Stevens now opens the cell door. It opened with a loud metallic sound. That brings us to the end of part 1. We'll continue the story in part 2. Thank you, children.